74 people boarded airplanes in Australia and New Zealand this month, crossed the Pacific Ocean, and are now working American fire lines. 15 of them make up a single incident management team. 59 of them are fire line management personnel. All of them have been assigned to the Northwest Geographic Area, according to the National Interagency Fire Center's Incident Management Situation Report, issued Tuesday, July 28, 2026, at 0730 Mountain Daylight Time. That is not a goodwill tour. That is not a training exchange. Under the official criteria of the American National Preparedness Scale, foreign wildland fire personnel are requested when domestic resources are committed to the point where the system considers exhaustion a live possibility. The United States has been sitting at Preparedness Level 5, the top of that scale, since July 18th. As of this recording, 92 large fires are burning across the country, 9 of them new since yesterday, with 25,244 firefighters and support personnel already committed. Stick around to the end because I am going to show you exactly why those 74 people from the other hemisphere are the most revealing number in this entire fire season, and why the calendar turns that number from a headline into a warning. Subscribe now if you want the updates, because this one is changing daily. Before we get into the details, I want to be upfront about something. On its own, Preparedness Level 5 is not a shocking headline. The National Interagency Fire Center has declared PL5 in July before, in 2018, in 2021, and in 2024, according to reporting by Time. A fire weather scientist quoted in that same piece described the current timing as fairly typical for this point in the calendar, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. What makes this particular moment worth a full breakdown is not the number on the scale, it is what that number unlocks, and what the country has actually chosen to do with it. PL5 is the stage at which out-of-country resources become available to request. The United States requested them. That request is the story. Here is what the record says. The National Multi-Agency Coordinating Group at the National Interagency Fire Center raised the National Preparedness Level to 5 on July 18, 2026, at 7:30 in the morning Mountain Time. The Incident Management Situation Report published on the morning of July 28 lists 92 large fires under suppression nationwide, including 9 new large incidents reported since the previous day and 6 large fires reaching containment. It counts 90 uncontained large fires still running. It counts 25 complex incident management teams committed and 1 National Incident Management Organization team committed. Initial attack activity that morning was logged as light, with 119 fires. The national resource commitment stands at 25,244 firefighters and support personnel, 558 crews, 1,525 engines, and 156 helicopters. Year to date, the same agency reports 42,651 fires have burned more than 4.5 million acres across the United States. The Northwest Geographic Area is carrying the heaviest load, with 48 uncontained large fires and 19 complex incident management teams committed across Oregon and Washington alone. 2 of those numbers are the ones I want you to hold on to. 1 incident management team and 59 fireline management personnel from Australia and New Zealand assigned to the Northwest. 2 modular airborne firefighting system C-130 airtankers and their support personnel from the 302nd Airlift Wing, an Air Force Reserve unit based at Peterson Space Force Base in Colorado, deployed to Klamath Falls, Oregon. Those are not forecasts. Those are entries in a federal situation report that gets rewritten every single morning, and tomorrow morning's version is already being assembled. To understand why those entries matter, you have to understand what the preparedness scale is actually measuring, because almost everyone gets this wrong. It is not a measure of how much land is burning. It is not a danger rating for the public. It is an inventory scale. Think of the National Wildland Fire System as a hospital with a fixed number of surgeons. Preparedness Level 1 is a quiet Tuesday morning. Every geographic area handles its own patients with local staff, and nobody is borrowing anybody. Preparedness Level 2 is a busier shift, with fire danger climbing in several regions and a modest amount of movement between them. Level 3 is where the National Interagency Coordination Center starts routing personnel across state lines in volume, with roughly half the national crew capacity committed. Level 4 is competition, and that word appears in the official language for a reason. 3 or more geographic areas are running incidents that require the most complex management teams, and those regions are now bidding against each other for the same finite pool of people. Around 60% of the top-tier teams and crews are spoken for. And then there is Level 5, where the National Multi-Agency Coordinating Group states plainly that incidents nationally have the potential to exhaust all agency fire resources, with roughly 80% of Type 1 and Type 2 initial attack crews committed along with the majority of other national resources. That is the definition, written by the agency itself in its own mobilization guide. It is not editorial language. It is a threshold. But the piece that almost nobody explains is what happens on the ground when that threshold is crossed, and it has a name. Drawdown. When the country moves to level 5, regions that are not currently burning start shipping their engines, their crews, and their aviation assets to the regions that are. A fire department in a quiet corner of the Great Plains can find itself thinner in August than it was in June, not because anything changed locally, but because the national system reached into its shelf and took what it needed. That is the mechanism by which a fire in Oregon changes the response time in South Dakota. Fire officials in Pennington County, South Dakota, said exactly that publicly this month when the level was raised, warning that resource availability, staffing, and response planning are affected nationwide even where nothing is burning. So when you hear 25,244 personnel committed, do not picture a reserve army. Picture a shelf that has been pulled forward, and a country that is now operating with less depth everywhere at once. The scarcest item on that shelf is not the person holding the hose, it is the person running the map. A complex incident management team is a rotating command structure of experienced specialists who take over a fire that has grown beyond what a local unit can manage. Planning, operations, logistics, finance, safety, air operations. These teams take years to build, they cannot be improvised, and there is a hard national ceiling on how many exist. When the July 28 report says 25 complex incident management teams are committed, with 19 of them in Oregon and Washington, it is telling you that the country's supply of institutional command experience is concentrated in one corner of the map, and a fire without a qualified team is a fire that grows while paperwork happens. That is the specific hole the Australians and New Zealanders were flown in to fill. The aircraft tell you the same story from a different angle. The modular airborne firefighting system is a self-contained tank and pressurized retardant delivery unit that slides into the cargo bay of a military C-130. The airframe is not a firefighting airplane. It is a troop and cargo transport that becomes a firefighting airplane in a matter of hours when the pallet is loaded. Each one carries roughly 3,000 gallons of retardant and is built to lay it down in a single pass across the head of a fire. And here is the part that gives the deployment its weight. MAFFS is legally a surge capability. The Secretary of Defense activates it at the request of the United States Forest Service, and the request only goes out when the civilian contracted air tanker fleet is fully committed or otherwise unavailable. In other words, the presence of 2 Air Force Reserve C-130s sitting at the Klamath Falls air tanker base is not a show of strength. It is documentary evidence that the commercial fleet ran out of margin. The 302nd Airlift Wing's second aircraft was activated and positioned on July 15th, 3 days before the national level went to 5. And they are not alone. Reporting on the current activation lists a MAFFS C-130 from the 153rd Airlift Wing of the Wyoming Air National Guard operating out of San Bernardino, California, and another from the 146th Airlift Wing of the California Air National Guard at Santa Maria. The military air tanker reserve is not being tested, it is being spent. But here is the part that almost no one is covering, and it is the reason this specific July matters more than the 2018, 2021, or 2024 versions of the same headline. The international exchange that brought those 74 people across the Pacific works for one reason and one reason only. The seasons are opposite. Australia and New Zealand are in winter right now. Their bushfire season is dormant, their incident management specialists are between deployments, and their expertise is available precisely because their own continent is not on fire. That is the entire physical basis of the arrangement, which the National Interagency Fire Center notes has operated under formal bilateral terms since 2002. It is elegant, it is cheap, and it has quietly become load-bearing. The Australasian Fire and Emergency Service Authorities Council and its National Resource Sharing Center coordinate the deployment on behalf of individual state agencies, drawing personnel from New South Wales, Victoria, Western Australia, and beyond. The specialists are contracted for roughly 30 days of operational support, 5 weeks door-to-door. And the request itself has become routine in a way that should make you uncomfortable. In 2018, 138 Australian and New Zealand personnel came to Northern California and the Northwest. In 2024, 71 arrived in early August. This year the number is 74, and they arrived in July. Here is what the headline number does not tell you. That arrangement is a hedge against a very specific assumption, which is that the northern and southern hemispheres do not run out of capacity at the same time. Peer-reviewed work on international suppression sharing has been flagging exactly this vulnerability, noting that rising simultaneity between regions that share resources internationally directly limits how much can actually be shared. The system was designed for a world where fire seasons took turns. The evidence is accumulating that they are starting to overlap, and the buffer is thinner than the arrangement's smooth operation makes it look. New Zealand's contribution to this deployment is 5 people. Fire and Emergency New Zealand's Deputy National Commander described the team as trained and experienced in large-scale incident management, and they are embedded into American teams across planning, intelligence, operations supervision, and aviation coordination. 5 people. That is what a national fire service on the other side of the world can spare without weakening itself. and it is a useful measure of how shallow the global pool actually is when you look at it honestly. Then there is the aviation layer, which most coverage has missed entirely. The New South Wales Rural Fire Service sent its large air tanker, the Marie Bashir, to the United States ahead of the personnel contingent. That aircraft has already dropped more than 500,000 liters of retardant on American fires, most recently supporting operations on the Summit Fire near Pinon Hills in California. A sovereign nation's strategic firefighting aircraft is currently working California and Oregon instead of sitting on its home ramp. If the Southern Hemisphere season arrives early or arrives hard, that airframe has to fly home, and the American fleet does not get a replacement. Every asset in this story is borrowed against a season that has not started yet somewhere else. And now the calendar. This is where the story gets genuinely complicated. The National Preparedness Level went to 5 on July 18th. In the western United States, fire season does not peak in July. It peaks in late August and September. The National Interagency Fire Center's own outlook work has projected an average of roughly 15 significant fires in July, rising to about 17 in August. And the North American Seasonal Assessment issued this month forecasts above normal significant fire potential continuing through August across much of the Northwest, northeastern California, the northern Great Basin, and the west slope of the Rockies. Which means the country hit maximum national commitment, activated the military air tanker reserve, and imported foreign incident commanders before arriving at the part of the year that historically does the most damage. In 2017, the last comparable stretch of sustained maximum commitment before the recent run, the level went to 5 on August 10th and stayed there for 40 days. This year the clock started 3 weeks earlier in the calendar, and it is still running. I want to make this concrete, because the numbers can turn into wallpaper. On June 27th, 5 firefighters from the Rifle Hell Attack crew were engaged in initial attack operations on the Knowles Fire near the Colorado and Utah border, a fire that would later be absorbed into the larger Snyder Fire. They were caught in a burnover, which is the term for a fire moving faster than the escape route allows. Emily Barker, 38, of Clinton Township, Michigan, Nick Hutcherson, 27, of Glendale, Arizona, Sidney Watson, 27, of Warrior, Alabama. All 3 died at the scene. Nathan Matthews, 43, of Lincoln, Nebraska, spent nearly a month in medical care for his burn injuries and died on Friday, July 24th, according to the United States Department of the Interior. Wildland Fire Service Chief Brian Fennessy called it another heartbreaking loss for the Wildland Fire family in the department's release. Burke Miner of the Wildland Firefighter Foundation, which has been supporting the family, told KSL that it was not the outcome anybody saw coming and described a crew that had been preparing to go back out on assignment before the news came. That crew is part of the same national inventory those 25,244 committed personnel are drawn from. A serious accident investigation team is still reviewing what happened on that hillside, and the findings are not in yet. On the other side of the same ledger is Sam Quigley, the international liaison officer representing the 74 Australians and New Zealanders now working the Northwest. Speaking to Kivy, he explained that the 2 countries' fire training is very similar to American training, which is exactly why the personnel can be dropped into an American incident management team and function on day 1 without a learning curve. His contingent was split across more than a dozen separate incidents in Oregon and Washington. He also made a point that is easy to skip past, noting that Australia has repeatedly called on American and Canadian help during its own crises over many years. This is a favor being repaid, and favors drawn from a bank account that both hemispheres are steadily drawing down. To keep this danger properly in proportion, some honest arithmetic. Reaching preparedness level 5 is not rare, and it is not the end of the world. The Bureau of Land Management noted in 2024 that the country had reached PL5 in July only 4 times in the previous 2 decades, which makes July arrival uncommon but far from unheard of, and 2018, 2021, and 2024 all qualified. International assistance is likewise not an emergency improvisation. It runs on a written international mobilization guide covering Australia, Canada, Mexico, and New Zealand, and the underlying arrangements have been operating for more than 2 decades. Nobody involved is panicking, and you should not be either. What the data does and does not tell us matters here. The data tells us the current commitment level, the current fire count, the current acreage, and the current outlook probabilities. It does not tell us that any specific community will burn, it does not tell us when the level will come back down, and it cannot tell you which fire starts tomorrow. The seasonal outlooks for August through October are explicitly labeled low confidence because of a rapidly developing El Niño pattern whose effects on the western United States are still resolving. Anyone giving you a date is guessing, but proportion cuts in both directions. As of May 31st this year, the National Interagency Fire Center reported 2,412,214 acres already burned nationally, which was 195% of the previous 10-year average for that date, with 30,588 fires reported at 140% of average. 2 months later, that acreage figure has nearly doubled to more than 4.5 million. Research led by scientists at UCLA has found that American forest fires now burn roughly 10 times the annual acreage they did in 1985, and that high-severity fire in California increased roughly 30-fold between 1985 and 2024. The base rate is real. The base rate is also moving. So what do you actually do with this? First, if you live anywhere in the Northwest, the Northern Great Basin, the Rockies, or California, find your county emergency notification sign-up page and register your phone number today rather than at the moment you smell smoke. Because evacuation orders in Oregon and Washington run on a Level 1, Level 2, Level 3 system, and Level 3 means go now, not get ready. Second, photograph every room of your home and your vehicle identification numbers and store the images somewhere that is not your house, because insurance claims after a total loss come down to documentation you no longer have access to. Third, treat the 5-foot ring around your foundation as the highest value work you can do, clearing dead vegetation, bark mulch, stacked firewood, and anything under a deck, because ember ignition at the structure is what destroys most homes, not a wall of flame. Fourth, and this is the counterintuitive one, do not assume a local fire department response is available at its normal strength this month, because drawdown is a real and documented consequence of Preparedness Level 5, and the appropriate response is to lower your own risk tolerance rather than to count on someone else's margin. Fifth, check local fire restrictions before every single outdoor activity, and take seriously the mundane ignition sources the National Interagency Fire Center keeps publishing about, including parking a hot vehicle on dry grass and towing a trailer with a dragging safety chain, since roadside sparks start a meaningful share of these fires. Sixth, if you have prescriptions, pets, or anyone in the household with mobility limitations, stage the go bag now with a written list taped inside the door, because the decision-making window during a Level 3 order is measured in minutes. Seventh, buy or check the filters on an air purifier and identify one interior room you can seal, because smoke from fires hundreds of miles away is the most likely way this season reaches you personally. None of this is about fear. All of it is about being the household that is not improvising when your phone goes off. 3 things to watch over the next several days. The Daily Incident Management Situation Report from the National Interagency Coordination Center, specifically the uncontained large fire count and the number of complex incident management teams committed, because if that team number climbs while the fire count climbs, the system is tightening rather than loosening. The National Fire News page at MAFFS C for any additional international mobilization or further MAFFS activation beyond the current 4 aircraft, since each new request is a direct readout on domestic margin. And the monthly significant wildland fire potential outlook, which will tell you whether the Northwest stays above normal into September. I will be watching the NIFC Incident Management Situation Report closely over the coming days, and I will come back the moment those numbers move. This is not a story with an ending yet. The 74 people from the other hemisphere are contracted for about 30 days, and what happens when that clock runs out, in the middle of the part of the season that historically hits hardest, is not written anywhere. Subscribe so you get the update when it is. Stay safe out there.